Carbon dating was not invented until 1949. Sunlight strikes the atmosphere, slaps the nitrogen around, and turns it into carbon-14. About 21 pounds of carbon-14 is produced every year, and that is spread out all over the world. If you look at a periodic table, carbon and nitrogen are right next to each other. Nitrogen has an atomic weight of 14, carbon has an atomic weight of 12. But if the sunlight slaps the nitrogen around, it'll knock a few things off of it and it becomes carbon-14. Carbon-14 is unstable. About half of it is going to fall apart every 5,700 years. While it is carbon-14, it's floating around in the atmosphere, like the rest of the carbon, and it latches onto oxygen, like carbon often does, and becomes carbon dioxide. And the plants are breathing in CO2. Animals come along and eat the plants. Well, the plants are absorbing CO2. Some of it is radioactive. So if the atmosphere contains 0.0000765%, it is assumed that the plants also have 0.0000765%. When the plant or animal dies, it stops eating, stops taking in more C14, it stops breathing. Okay? Now whatever it had is going to decay. It was decaying while it was alive, but now there's nothing to replace it. Because it continues to decay after it died, but now it can't be replaced. So while it was alive, it should have had about 0.0000765%. If it's only got 0.0003825%, it's been dead for 1 half-life, or 2 half-lives, or 3 half-lives, etc. In theory, it never goes to 0. But for practical purposes, you can't measure beyond a certain amount. You know, you're going to run out of stuff to measure. It goes from a half to a fourth to an eighth to a 16th to not enough to measure. A great article came out from Institute for Creation Research. They're the ones that did the RATE project, ICR.org. They said, with their short 5,700-year half-life, no carbon-14 atoms should exist in any carbon older than 250,000 years. They should all be gone. Yet it's proven impossible to find any natural source of carbon below the Ice Age that does not contain significant amounts of carbon-14. Even though such strata are supposed to be millions or billions of years old, conventional carbon-14 laboratories have been aware of this anomaly since the early 80s and have striven to eliminate it and are unable to account for it. Lately, the world's best such laboratory, which has learned during 2 decades of low C14 measurements how not to contaminate specimens externally, under contract to creationists, they confirmed such observations for coal samples and even for a dozen diamonds. Now think what that means. The textbooks will tell you coal formed 250 million years ago in the Carboniferous era. And yet when they test coal, it still has carbon-14. How is that possible? If all the carbon-14 atoms would have disappeared in, say, 30, 40, 50,000 years, why would there still be carbon-14 atoms in coal? I got an idea. It's not 250,000 years old? Ooh, boy, they don't like that answer. They'll keep searching until they find another answer because they don't like that one for sure. And diamonds, which they say, you know, formed millions and millions of years ago, you know, they still have carbon-14 in them. And it's not possible to contaminate one of those things. I mean, it's the hardest substance we have. So how do you get carbon-14 in diamonds? It says this cannot be contaminated. Those constitute very strong evidence the Earth is only thousands, not billions of years old. This one is excellent by Donald DeYoung, thousands, not billions. He kind of summarizes in real English what they said. If the Earth had a canopy of water above the atmosphere, or a canopy of ice, as we cover on Seminar 2, that would have blocked out a lot of radiation from the sun, which would have prevented most of the carbon-14 from even forming. So animals that lived before the flood would have lived in a world with much less carbon-14 to begin with, maybe none, but certainly less. And when we dig up the fossil that's been buried for 4,400 years, let's say it started with 4, where today we start with 16. We dig it up 4,400 years after the flood and say, wow, here's a mammoth that got buried, and it's carbon dated. Well, we're assuming it started at 16. When we test it and find it's got 2, we're going to say, oh, it's been through 4 half-lives, when it's actually only been through 1 half-life. Which is why it never works. When they first invented carbon dating, 1949, Willard Libby, they did some testing and they said, the lower leg of a mammoth was 15,000 years old, but the skin was 21,000. Quite obviously, we know one of the numbers is wrong. So how would you know either of them are right? And if either one's right, how would you know which one? I see no way to tell. Well, let's see if it's getting better. 14 years later, they tested a living mollusk, a clam, and it was 2,300 years old. Still alive. In 1970, at the Nobel Symposium, they said, if a carbon date supports our theories, we put it in the main text. If it does not entirely contradict them, we put it in a footnote. If it's completely out of date, we just drop it. You mean they can pick and choose any numbers they want? Exactly correct. If the number doesn't fit what they expected, they throw the number out. 1971, freshly killed seal was 1,300 years old when they carbon dated it. Troubles with carbon dating are undeniably deep and serious. Despite 35 years of technological refinement and better understanding, the underlying assumptions have been strongly challenged and warnings are out that radiocarbon dating may soon find itself in a crisis situation. Continuing use of the method depends on a fix-it-as-we-go approach, allowing for contamination here, fractionation there, and calibration wherever possible. It should be no surprise then that fully half the dates are rejected. Did you follow that? Out of thousands of carbon dates that have been carbon dating times that they've done it, half of the numbers are thrown out. How do they know they're wrong? And also, how would you know the other half is right? If half your test results have to be thrown out, it ought to raise red flags in somebody's brain. Wait a minute. This is stupid. What are we doing? We're wasting our time here. And the article goes on to say, the wonder is, surely, that the remaining half have come to be accepted. No matter how useful it is, the radiocarbon method is still not capable of yielding accurate and reliable results. There are gross discrepancies, the chronology is uneven and relative, and the accepted dates are actually selected dates. This whole blessed thing is nothing but 13th century alchemy. And I agree. That's 1981. Now, I've got all these in chronological order. It never gets better. 1984, living snails carbon dated 27,000 years old. 1992, two mammoths found side by side. They carbon date them. One is 22,000, the other is 16,000. Which one's right? Or are both of them wrong? Or are both of them right? There is no possible way to tell. In 1996, Carl Swisher at Berkeley University used the most advanced techniques to date human fossils. It says last spring he was reevaluating Homo erectus skulls found in Java in the 1930s. He was testing the sediment found with them. The species was supposed to be extinct for 250,000 years. Swisher used two different dating methods. He kept making the same startling find. The bones were 53,000 years at most, and possibly no more than 27,000. Well, I'd like to point out two things here. He's looking for 250,000 as his answer, but he keeps getting 53 to 27,000, okay? Which is only 1/4 of what he wants, 1/5 of what he wants, okay? But he's still getting a 96% error. I mean, is it 27,000 or 53,000? This is not an exact science. Professor Reiner Protsch von Zieten, earlier the February of 2005, was resigned from a professor because he'd been lying about carbon dating for years. His frauds were exposed in February of 2005. He had dated the Bischoff spire skeleton at 21,300 years old, but when they tested him at Oxford, they said it's only 3,300 years old. 700% error. He had said, Professor Protsch had said he had found the oldest German, the first German to ever move to Germany, 27,400 years old. They tested it at Oxford and said, this is an old man that died in 1750. He's 250 years old. The professor had been lying about this stuff for decades, and so he finally resigned in disgrace. Well, he should, okay? One part of a mammoth dated 29,000 years old, another part was 44,000.